Dear friends, dear colleagues, a warm welcome from the Washington office of the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung for our today's event on the future of NATO and Ukraine, next steps after the Alliance's Washington summit. We are very privileged to have three distinguished speakers today with us, and our moderator, Liana Fix, who is going to moderate this discussion and this event. We thought from our perspective that it might be very fruitful to have almost 1 week after this historic summit taking place here in Washington, a look back and a short analysis from especially those countries who are very much concerned, first of all, Ukraine, but also Germany as one of the most important members of NATO, and also from the US. So therefore, once again, thank you for joining us today. And without further ado, I hand over to Liana, who's going to moderate. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on whether you're joining from Berlin or from Washington, D.C. My name is Liana Fix. I'm a fellow for Europe here at the Council on Foreign Relations in Washington, D.C. I'm delighted to moderate this conversation with our speakers. We have with us today Alexei Goncharenko, who is a member of the Ukrainian Parliament and also a member of the Ukrainian delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. We also have with us a member of Bundestag, Johann Wadepool, who is the Deputy Chairman for Foreign Affairs and Defense Policy, and also head of the German parliamentary delegation to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and long-time foreign policy expert in the CDU-CSU faction in Germany and in Berlin. And we also have with us Giselle Donnelly. She's Senior Fellow in Defense and National Security here in Washington at the American Enterprise Institute. So obviously there's a lot to discuss when it comes to the outcome of the NATO summit. There was a lot of pomp, a lot of celebration, given that it was NATO's 75th anniversary. It was a big celebration event in the Mellon Auditorium, 2 days of meetings and discussions here in DC. Everyone who's based here has certainly had his own fair share of questions about the impact on traffic versus the value of NATO here in town. But the outcome and the actual deliverable, apart from the pomp and celebration, can certainly be discussed controversially. The NATO summit was designed to also show the US population why NATO is still a good deal for the United States, and to communicate why Europeans are contributing their fair share to their burden, and obviously to institutionalize Ukraine support, which means to Trump-proof Ukraine support under a NATO umbrella. This was the ambition of the summit. Let's have a look whether these ambitions were fulfilled or not, and if the NATO summit perhaps could have been more ambitious, given that it's its 75th anniversary, or if that's what we have right now. We will start with Alexei Goncharenko. And perhaps from your perspective, it was clearly for Ukraine a less controversial summit than the Vilnius summit last year, where President Zelensky and the Ukrainian delegation have been very unhappy about the result, which did not give Ukraine an invite to become a NATO member, but removed the NATO membership action plan. Now there's the criticism that this summit has done a lot for Ukraine support, but has not done a lot when it comes to Ukraine's accession perspective. So the membership action plan has been taken off the table, but there's no alternative plan how to reach NATO membership for Ukraine, no criteria or timeline defined in the communiqué, only an irreversible path and a bridge as a rhetorical instrument to underline NATO's commitment. Are you satisfied with that, Alexei? And what would you hope to expect from next year's NATO summit, more ambitious steps towards Ukraine's accession? Over to you.
Hello, I'm not satisfied, and I will now explain, and I think we can't be satisfied. I think this is a summit of disappointment. But first, I would like to thank Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung for invitation to take part in this discussion. I think it's very timely and very important. I'm joining you from Kyiv. There is no electricity in the biggest part of the city. In general, Ukrainians now are 12, 18 hours without electricity each day, depending from the region and from the day. So Russians are in offensive. And all these celebrations in DC, they looked strange for us. For Ukraine, again, it is a disappointment because all these rhetorics, now this time irreversible path, breach, we are tired from this. Everything started in 2008 in Bucharest summit, where unfortunately it was Germany who was strongly against Ukraine moving to NATO and some other countries. And as the result of this, it was about Ukraine and Georgia. And the result of this, Russia started the war against Georgia in several months and against Ukraine in 6 years. They realized that that was a decision about open doors. One more rhetoric, open doors of NATO to Ukraine and Georgia, but without any concrete decisions. And it only encouraged Russia to attack. This time, during these 16 years, we received a number of other rhetorics. It was Ukraine will be a member of NATO, and this time breach, irreversible path, and many other rhetoric forms. And these rhetoric forms don't help you when Russian missiles and drones are falling on your head. That's the reality. And it's clear this time it was again United States and Germany who were against invitation of Ukraine to NATO, first of all, these countries. And explanation is that we can't take Ukraine to NATO, invite even Ukraine to NATO during the war. But it means for Putin never end this war. Okay, so never end it. So what is the message to Putin? The message is that NATO is still afraid of him. That's, I think, the message which can be taken from this summit. It's not just about the fact that Ukraine was not invited, despite the fact that I think it's clear to everybody that attempt to build security in Europe by having Ukraine as a buffer between Russia and NATO failed, just failed. And there is no sense to discuss this idea anymore. It just doesn't work. So we need the only way to have security on the continent is to have Ukraine in NATO. And not only NATO, but not only Ukraine, but also NATO will benefit from this. Because Ukrainian army today is one of the strongest of NATO, maybe the second strongest after the United States, if not to count the nuclear weaponry. Because Ukrainian army is 1 million battle-hardened people who know what is the modern warfare of 21st century. Only Russia and the United States of America have such armies, nobody else in the world. And I think it is a big mistake. It's a big problem for Ukraine, but it's also a big mistake for NATO not to invite Ukraine. But even if not to take into account this, in other decisions which were not made about right of Ukraine to attack objects inside Russian territory, because it's our self-defense. We are like a boxer boxing with one hand tied. We just can't ever win like this. Russia can attack all our territories any inch they want, and we can't. It's crazy. We will never achieve any result like this. Second thing, it's absolutely crazy thing about when Ukraine asks that air defense of NATO should be used on Polish-Ukrainian and Romanian-Ukrainian border to protect Poland and Romania, and that these systems should intercept Russian missiles and drones when they are in their area of responsibility, so in Ukrainian territory. We hear refusal. Why? We all remember what had happened in Poland when a Russian missile entered Polish airspace for 40 seconds and then came back to Ukraine. And then Minister of Defense of Poland told on press conference, it was just 40 seconds and then it came back. So that's why we didn't intercept it. I mean, it's crazy. And what it would be if it would attack any object in Poland or just fall there. So it's very weak position and it's very bad signal for Putin. So conclusion, this is a summit of disappointment. Unfortunately, NATO didn't show enough courage to make bold steps. Putin understands only the language of force, of strength, only bold steps. Putin is encouraged after this summit. This is very bad. And Ukraine now is at the dilemma. We are fighting against nuclear country. This nuclear country attacked us. I will not speak now about Budapest Memorandum 30 years ago. Everybody knows this. It's very unfair. But what to do in future for us? So either we will become member of NATO, which is an alliance with the nuclear weaponry, or we will never have any equilibrium with Russia, with any army, when Russia is a nuclear state and we are not. So if all these rhetorics continue and there is no real steps to take Ukraine to NATO, the only way to security for Ukraine is to restore its nuclear status, to obtain nuclear weaponry, and by this to protect ourselves, our children and women. Thank you.
Thanks so much. That was very insightful, and it is also a strong contrast, contrasting strongly the situation in Kiev and the celebration here at the Washington summit. Let's take this further. You already mentioned Germany's role, and speak to Johan Wadepool. So if you ask NATO allies how they perceive the discussion ahead of the summit here in Washington, you will hear from many allies, including the French, that they would have been willing to go further, to go for Vilnius Plus, Vilnius Plus Plus, Vilnius Plus Plus Plus, but that it was Germany and the United States that were not in favor of that and basically hiding against each other, behind each other, in terms of when you speak to Germans, they would say, oh no, it's the United States, and when you would speak to the administration here, they would say, oh no, it's Germany, we need to find an alliance consensus that doesn't allow us sort of to go further on Ukraine's membership perspective. And I think it's less about an invitation, but probably about the question of timeline and criteria, which is discussed. How would you respond to that, Johan Wadepool, and also to the other share of criticism that Oleksiy just raised in the discussion? And I think no one will dispute that the Ukraine support is fundamental and important, but the question is, how do we envision the future relationship with Ukraine? Will it be a too-tired NATO, where Ukraine will be one of the closest partners, but never really enjoy the privilege and the luxury of Article 5? Over to you.
Thank you so much for having me, and sunny greetings from Schleswig-Holstein in the very north of Germany. I came back with positive feelings from the summit last week from Washington back to Germany, because look, if you realize that our alliance is stronger than it was before, because we have 2 new members, and I'm living at the shores of the Baltic Sea with 2 new neighbors here in NATO. NATO members again know what the purpose of this alliance is for. People in our countries again realize that this alliance is very important for their future and their security. I would really say this was a positive celebration of a positive alliance, which again knows what it is for. And I think all the threats we are facing are our common threats, and together we will be able to meet them and to counter them and to stay together stronger than we were before. Soberly looking at what we are doing, what we are contributing to the alliance, I would also agree we are not doing enough. Germany meets the 2% goal this year, perhaps next year, but only by using a special fund we have created, and we as opposition help the government to overcome the constitutional restrictions we do have here in Germany. So this allows our government to spend more than 2% for this year, the next year, and the forthcoming year, but no longer then. So Germany has to do more for the midterm, for the next years, to be able to bring these very necessary 2%, so Tallinn Plus, to reach the 2%. May I also look to other countries, not only in Europe, but also perhaps to Canada, who do not reach the 2% for now. And I really would like to ask all the other countries, what has to happen that you reach the 2%? What else, as a real conflict, as a real war here in Europe, which not only involves Ukraine, but all of us? So that is the sober view on Germany. We have to do more on the future, and to a lot of partners, big countries here in Europe, who really have to do more to reach the 2% goal, which is not a new goal, but was founded in 2014. The third thing I would like to say is Ukraine. A lot of countries also are doing the utmost they can do. We just reached that the F-16s were handed over to Ukraine, and which will enable them to be stronger in the fight against Russia. But in my view, there are a lot of countries which could really do and supply Ukraine in a better way than they are doing today. Looking to the numbers, the Kiel Institute offers to all of us and makes public to everybody, you see very quickly that there are a lot of NATO member states who stay below of what is really possible for them to make to hand over to sorry, am I still in or not?
Yes. We can still hear you.
Yes, sorry, I had an interruption. Excuse me, please. So there are a lot of countries who could look into their own military equipment, their own ammunition reserves, and could really do more for Ukraine exactly right now. And the fourth and last thing I would like to say, the accession process from Ukraine to NATO. It is absolutely clear, as long as there are territory disputes, as long as Ukraine is in war, it is really not possible to have an accession to NATO. That would be overwhelming, not only for the governments, but also for the peoples in our countries in Europe to demand this. We, in my view, should do everything to let Ukraine really win that war, to let Ukraine really be successful and throw all Russians out of the countries. We all know where the international borders are from Ukraine, and I think we should really do everything that this is successful. And if it was, this then will be the moment where we have to come to the conclusion that the accession should happen. But I would really like to say, I'm in opposition. I'm urging our country to do more, to deliver Taurus and so on and so on. But I don't expect that Germany or the United States will be the problematic states. Then look what happened when Finland and Sweden wanted to become members of the alliance. It was Turkey, it was Hungary, who needed a very long time until they were positive to that accession. So I don't expect that Germany and the United States will be the problematic states when it comes to real membership for Ukraine. But the first thing and the main thing we have to reach is that Ukraine is really able to defend its own country and to throw all Russians out of the country. And for that aim, there's a lot to do. And of course, in these days, more than ever before, everybody is looking to the United States. And what can we expect from the next administration?
Yeah.
Thank you so far.
Perhaps I can follow up on that very quickly. On the territorial question, of course, there would be some who argue, well, West Germany also had disputed borders at the time it joined NATO. Although
it was not in war. It was not in war. And we had two states. We had a Western Germany, Federal Republic of Germany state then, when it joined in the midst of the 50s of the last century NATO. So that was not really disputed borders as we see them now in Ukraine.
Yeah, probably the question of where one can draw some inspiration, at least for solving Ukraine's predicament, because it's so unlikely that the borders will be restored soon. But just as a quick follow-up, you already mentioned the situation in the United States, and you talked about the 2% and the towers discussion and so on. And Giselle will be able to give us an outlook on that. But aren't these perhaps discussions of yesterday, because we are faced now with a very real prospect of a second Trump presidency, especially after the terrible events of the after the weekend, the discussion within the Democratic Party. So the 2% discussion is a discussion which already now in Washington, D.C. feels outdated. The pride that many Europeans have to come to town with 2%. Here it's, well, 2%. Were 2014's 2%. We should be sort of way beyond that. All these sort of small discussions about towers or not, it almost feels like this is sort of the yesterday discussion of the Biden administration, whereas tomorrow's discussion will be about what are the big steps to take? How can Europeans take care of their own security more in a way than just sort of discussing the nitty-gritty of 2% and which weapons will be delivered for Ukraine? Are you concerned that Europeans are sort of looking in a too small picture, given the gravity of the situation that we have now?
Yes, I am. You're absolutely right. We are living in two different worlds, security worlds, not only Europeans. May I mention again Canada, which only reaches, I think, 1.4% or so.
Well, they're lucky they're in the neighborhood of the US.
It's the United States, the United Kingdom, some other countries who are fulfilling the 2% criteria and perhaps more solidly, and also for the next years. If I look to Germany, we reached it this year, and Chancellor Scholz was really proud to present that in Washington. But he has no idea, he has absolutely no idea how to reach a 2%, at least at 28 or so. We have a gap by 30 billion euros in our budget to reach a 2%. So that is really a big margin to be fulfilled, and to tell this to the people in the upcoming general elections we have to expect the next year is for each and every party really a problematic issue. Also for my party, which is absolutely clear with the 2%. And that is the same issue you will find in France, in a very problematic situation, political situation right there, with the far right and the far left also criticizing the 2%. And urging the president and the parliament to give more money for the pension system and so on. So we are living in two worlds, and that is really a fear I do have with coming Mr. Trump back into the White House and being absolutely clear that he not only expects, that he demands from all Europeans to fulfill the 2% and to deliver on that field. So that is really, if we forecast the future of NATO for the next year, there is a lot at risk. there is a high expectation from Washington, which Europeans and perhaps Canada are not ready to fulfill per now.
And painful trade-offs to make. 2%, it will quickly be more than 2% for.
Yes, well, of course.
Giselle, perhaps we can bring you in at this point. What is your take from a Washington perspective on the European burden sharing discussion, and also a little bit the question that Johan Wadepoel also just raised? Are we living sort of in two worlds right now? In one world where we have sort of the old benchmarks, the kind of nostalgic world, transatlantic world, where the Joe Biden administration, Europeans were closely working together for Ukraine support, and at the same time a new world is already lurking around the corner, which might be much more dramatic, both for Europeans but also for Ukraine.
Well, I would say that the Biden administration is also living in the past to a certain degree. And just as kind of a headline, I fear that what we just saw at the summit is the beginning of the demise, if not the dissolution, of the Atlantic Alliance. Alex gave a very succinct expression of how the situation looks from Kyiv, but I think that view could be expanded in many ways that would reveal that things are actually worse than they appear to be. We've had these burden sharing discussions for, I think, as long as I've been alive, at least professionally alive. And the level of posturing and ignorance about the subject is just absolutely stunning. Let's just take the American defense budget, which is barely over 3% of GDP, but of course is not solely concentrated on Europe, is spread across the entire planet. So if we sort of imagine what level of spending is devoted to European security out of the U.S. defense budget or out of the U.S. economy, I think the right number is more like 1% rather than 2%. And also, 2% is a number from the past. The Poles are on a path to get to 4% of their economy, and they're going to become the most as powerful as any army on the European continent, the United States Army included. But the important point is that all these metrics and all these issues that we fuss so repeatedly about are just not addressing the issue. The key issue is not just the future of Ukraine in the West, and to find a path to get there and stop wringing our hands about it, but also to think more broadly about completing the old George H.W. Bush formula for at least American strategy in Europe, and that was of a Europe whole and free. Even were Ukraine to be entirely recovered and drawn into the alliance, that would still leave places like Moldova and Georgia and even Armenia out of the alliance. So the opportunities that arose with the collapse of the Soviet Empire are almost now entirely dissipated. And I hate to sound so pessimistic, but especially if you add Donald Trump to this general pattern of failing to seize opportunities, failing to seize the moment, coming up short when a clear challenge such as the renewed invasion of Ukraine comes along, then you have to ask what really the future of the transatlantic alliance is going to be. Mark Rutte may be a great politician. He certainly led his country for a long time. But this is a moment that cries out for having a politician from a frontline state express the intent to the strategic purpose of the alliance, which is not just securing Ukraine, getting it at least in part, while even if the war is continuing, you're allowed to form alliances in the middle of wartime. And if conversely, the alliance and the United States fail this moment, they are putting the whole architecture of the transatlantic alliance in jeopardy, I fear. So the future looks very bleak, and it looks entirely black if you add Donald Trump to the equation.
That was a very pessimistic take, and not on the.
Well, I'm just trying to keep things interesting, you know.
Was done at a certain level, but let me pick up from that. You talked about this one moment for Ukraine, especially with the Trump presidency coming in, and Alexei would like to get back to you on this. You also mentioned the Bucharest summit, and to some extent, Ukraine is obviously supported militarily now, but the ambiguity of the Bucharest summit, which said, well, you'll become member one day, but we will not exactly say when and how, has remained. So, Alexei, do you think it is a historical window of opportunity that is closing for Ukraine on its path to NATO accession, especially with regard to the November elections? And I know we don't always talk too much about Trump as the elephant in the room, but again, especially after the events on Saturday evening, what is your best and what is your worst case scenario for Ukraine and for Ukraine's relationship with NATO if Trump is elected in November? Could you sketch this out very quickly for us? What would be your greatest fear and what would be your greatest hope how things can work out?
Yeah, thank you. First, for us, I think it's much bigger story. Your first question you asked about Ukraine, historical window of opportunity. I think it's much bigger story than about Ukraine. I love my country. I'm Ukrainian politician, but it's much bigger than about Ukraine. Ukraine, so now there are two scenarios. In one scenario, Ukraine in some way will prevail in this war, will continue to exist and will be strong. In this case, sooner or later, I think NATO will start to look for Ukraine and ask our to come in. This moment also can be, and quite quickly. I mean, with all respect, the question is, I think the world is on the edge of the World War III, maybe already in. Who will be fighting with the Americans in the trenches near Beijing? Who will be there? I think many countries which are members of NATO, really, they don't ready. Ukrainians are ready. And that is which makes us very important, and we will be needed. But the question is if we will survive. If we will not survive, that will be much bigger story with emboldened Putin taking millions of Ukrainian men as a cannon fodder to attack Baltic states, Poland, Romania, Slovakia, Moldova, Georgia, and so on. And then it will be NATO which will fight. And I don't know how NATO will fight. I'm not so sure about all these words about every inch of NATO territory. We also received some guarantees in Budapest. It appeared to be just a paper. And never ever Article 5 was really tried. What will be when it will be tried by a nuclear country? I don't know the answer. Unfortunately, the messages which were coming from NATO now are very controversial. From one side, yes, there is a lot of support to Ukraine, and we are very thankful for this. Without this support, we would not survive to this moment. But from another point of view, this is enough support to survive, but not enough support to win. And it's clear fear of Putin from NATO, Putin of Russian nuclear weaponry. And so this is very mixed signal, and I don't know what really will happen. So it's about historical window of opportunity, not for Ukraine, but for NATO. I think that if Ukraine would lose, if Putin would achieve his goals, that would be loss, defeat not of just Ukraine, but of NATO, with the very huge consequences. I'm not sure that NATO will survive this. Speaking about your next question about President Trump, I think the story about Trump is clear. He's unpredictable. What he will do with the Russian-Ukrainian war, nobody knows, including, I think, even President Trump himself, because he doesn't think about this, I think, seriously now. He is in the race. He is fighting for presidency. And I don't think that he has a clear plan. He has some vision. He is quite open about this vision. It's some deal with Russia. But how it can be achieved? Can it be achieved at all? What he will do? So we in Ukraine, we think that President Trump can be very bad for Ukraine, but it can be very good for Ukraine. In the end of the day, it was President Trump who was first to deliver to Ukraine lethal weaponry, javelins. President Obama was refusing to do this. President Trump did this. So we just don't know, but definitely there is a lot of at stake, and there is a lot of danger, and there is a lot of uncertainty about what will happen after November.
Thanks so much. You mentioned an intriguing thought, which is that NATO will actually need Ukraine at some point, and probably especially NATO Europeans. Let me give this back to Johan Jan-Wadepoel. Well, let us think this scenario further. If it becomes true what Alexei predicts, that NATO cannot survive Trump, or at least sort of not in its current form, then it is obviously Germany, which is in sort of from the big countries in Europe, has the greatest predicament, because it will be in a strategic dilemma and in a security vacuum. It is conventionally not in a position to defend itself in the way it would want to in a conflict. How optimistic are you that Europeans will find a joint approach if it turns out as difficult as Alexei says, and if Trump will undermine NATO's Article 5? How positive are you that Europeans can find some kind of joint approach to this, some kind of, European model of security, especially given the huge gap in conventional capabilities, not to speak of the nuclear capabilities that Europeans have? Or would you be concerned that all European countries will try to go it alone, will try to make their own bilateral deals with Donald Trump, that nuclear weapons will be moved from Germany to Poland because Poland hopes to have a better relationship with Trump, and so on? I'm pretty sure I know what you would like to see, but how realistic do you think this is going to be in a scenario where Trump actually undermines NATO? And I know politicians are always careful with thinking about these kinds of hypothetical worst case scenarios, but I want to try to challenge you on this.
Yeah, there's one rule for politicians: never answer to a hypothetical
I know,
question.
but let me try, because it is an important question, isn't it?
No, if I realistically try to look into the future, that is absolutely clear that Mr. Putin will test us. So I fully agree with Alexei. He will test the Article 5 sooner than later. So we have to be prepared for that. And we have always been absolutely clear, and that is also what is behind the stationing of a new brigade, German brigade in Lithuania, that we will really defend each and every inch of NATO territory together with our allies. That is absolutely clear for Germany and for our allies here in Europe. I'm complaining about about the financial engagement of Europe, my own country, that we didn't do enough. That's absolutely clear. We are heading up, not fast enough, but never mind. We are clear when it comes to Article 5. There's the clear commitment from Germany and from other countries. And if you look back, and ask where's an example for that, look to Afghanistan. We've been with the United States from the very first day to the last day. Germany was there, no doubt. Whoever governed this country, we were there. We lost soldiers, yes, that was sad, but Germany was there and will ever be there if Article 5 is being tested in the Baltics or wherever. So there, I do not have any doubt, and I did it personally. I did a reserve exercise in the last year in Lithuania together with other soldiers from Germany, and I was 24/7 together with them, talked with them. We were 20 kilometers from the Belarusian border, and the Prigozhin plot or take was exactly at that time. I was talking to them. We were together as comrades, and nobody was really in fear. Nobody was doubting what to do. Everybody was clear what we had to do in case of that things happen, whichever always can happen in these situations. So that is absolutely clear. And vice versa, I would say to the United States, it's you're very right to demand more from us. But like Alexei said, a little bit similar to him, I would say the United States, if they realistically look on this earth, on the geostrategic situation they are and we are in, they will realize that we need each other. The United States will not alone be able to counter all the Chinese threats we all do see. They need Europe. It makes sense that we do it all together against China, against Russia, against Iran, against North Korea, and so on. So let's stay together. If we realize that we are, as NATO always says, stronger together, it's so simple as it is.
Do you think, if I may interrupt you, do you think this rhetoric actually works with Donald Trump? Because he will probably say, well, we can be together and you can still pay double as much, and I can have you at my side just by blackmailing you and telling you either you support my agenda on China or I will reduce my support for European security. So is he the kind of person who sees these kinds of stronger together? Yet Stoltenberg spoke about how important it is to have friends here in Washington at the festive celebration. Is that the mindset of that? Will that convince him as an argument?
I'm not part of the electorate in the United States, and I don't know whether I would vote for Trump. That's not the question. I'm a politician in Germany, and I have to work with the politicians who are elected in other countries, also in the countries which are my allied countries. So if President Trump is the next president again of the United States, so that's the most important person in the Western world, the most important ally to Germany and to Europe, and then he's the president. So we have to work with him. Then he will not be an emperor. He's not a dictator in the United States. There are other important persons in the Senate and the House of Representatives, in the military, and so on. And I know a lot of them, and I trust them, and I trust in the United States of America. I do not have really doubt that we will be able to counter all these threats I just described before. And I think that Mr. Trump knows that if the United States want to be strong, they will need Europe as a partner, as an ally. And he doesn't want that a dictator from Russia or from Iran or from North Korea will win against him or us or his allies. That's not what he wants. That's not his intention. I don't know. I don't like his language. I don't. In his first period, I didn't love all the things he did with Germany. Absolutely correct. But in the end of the day, he knows his administration will know who are his partners and who not. And we are not there. That will be an interesting time until November. And let's wait. Who's then really the next president of the United States of America? But looking to the interests of the United States, of Germany, and all the member states of NATO, I'm not really anxious that we will be able to be successful also in the future, and that we stay strong together.
It's good to hear the strong and reassuring position and belief in the United States. I also want to invite our audience to already ask questions if they have some in the Q&A chat. I have one coming in from Ana Herrero, but let me first give Giselle the opportunity to respond and perhaps to follow up just very quickly from what Johan Wadepoel said. Are you also such a strong believer in the US institutions, check and balances, Congress and the administration around a potential second Trump presidency? Or do you fear, as many do in town, that this can become more restrained, less restrained, especially as there seem to be a lot of ideas floating around about how NATO can look differently in the future, from a dormant NATO to a two-tier NATO and so on. Can you give us your take?
Well, the short answer is to rely on the mercurial nature of Donald Trump's mind and the brevity of his attention span strikes me as a rather risky plan. Even if that were so, even if Trump set aside alone would be of two minds about many things, this America First ideology has proliferated through the Republican Party, through Trump's base, so on and so forth. And it'd be a real question as to whether he would, and particularly Ukraine and NATO have received so much attention in the MAGA universe that I think it would be a little bit difficult for Trump not to at least partially fulfill some of these crazier ideas that are out there. Also, he's clearly determined to staff his administration this time around with people who are unquestionably loyal rather than professionally competent. You won't find many Jim Mattis appointees or H.R. McMaster type appointees in the White House or at the top of the agencies. And they also have a thoroughgoing plan to recast the civil service in a way that's premised on personal loyalty to the president. So their ability, they have been preparing for this in the most macabre kind of a way. So to be able to have the apparatus in place to carry out these ideas, which, as I say, have proliferated through the Republican Party and are not just crazy things that Trump says. I would point out that when the Ukraine supplemental finally passed, Republican majorities in both House and Senate voted against it. So there is an increasingly entrenched America First aspect, institutionalized or beginning to be institutionalized in the Republican Party. And how that political dynamic would play out is hard to say, but I don't think Trump will be easily able to bend with the wind. He's a little bit tied to a mast of his own construction.
Thank you, Giselle. So keep the questions coming from the audience. I have one which I would like you to answer, Giselle, which goes back to, instead of the very pessimistic future scenario that we've just discussed, goes back to the nitty-gritty of the outcome of the NATO summit. And the question comes from Ana Herrero. She asked about, where do you see American leadership coming out of the summit? So the United States is determined to maintain control of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, so that didn't land fully under NATO's umbrella. And do we see some additional responsibilities shifting to European allies?
Yeah, I saw American leadership leaking out of the bottom of the NATO summit, I'm afraid to say. Yeah, just to speak broadly about the question of Europe's ability to make up the difference of American leadership. I mean, it's sort of technically possible or logically possible, but we don't have much experience of a unified liberal Europe acting in the security realm without American leadership or even, British influence on the European continent. So history seems to tell us that there's always needed to be an outside balancer to help put things and keep things on the forward progress course in Europe. Europe may be forced to take on a greater leadership role and to pay more attention to security issues. But that strikes me as being extraordinarily risky, both for Europe, but also for American global leadership. If the Ukraine war ends badly, that, especially coming on top of Afghanistan and Iraq, will have a resonance in East Asia and the Middle East, which I think we may already be seeing. I think it was Alex who said characterized American and Western support for Ukraine as keeping Ukraine from losing and preventing them from winning. Yeah. That's a pretty miserable or unattractive message for our allies in other regions.
Thank you. Let me give probably a final question to Johan Wadepool and to Oleksiy Goncharenko. To Johan Wadepool, sort of against the backdrop of what we just discussed of what could happen in the next years, couldn't one have imagined a more ambitious agenda for this NATO summit, which would have had, let's say, a 10-year plan agreed upon between Europeans and the United States about which capabilities Europeans are going to take over within the next 5-10 years, in which time frame from the United States and Europe, to relieve the burden of the US in Europe, to allow it to shift more to the Indo-Pacific, and to have it as a constructive discussion between Europe and the United States. Instead, this kind of, US is turning away from us from the European side, and from the American side, well, the Europeans are not chipping in. Wouldn't that have been an ambitious outcome, to have a plan built together about how responsibilities and capabilities could be shifted in Europe, let's say, within the next 5 to 10 years? Are you missing something like that, or don't you think this will be necessary?
Yes, I'm missing that. And I think coming back to what Giselle said, that it's correct. The liberal democracies of Europe have to learn the security threats to answer it and to communicate it to their own societies, electorate, in order to have the political support to do things we are not used to do in Europe since the Second World War. But we will need the capability to encounter these threats, especially from Russia, but also from Iran and China. in the next decades. So we have to learn that, and we need European leadership for that. And I think that's especially a role Germany has to learn in the next time, and we haven't seen that on the summit. That of course, you need targets for that, and you have to explain how to reach them, and what is the duty of each and every country if we want to reach these targets. For this very reason, that is a thing you can criticize if you look back to the summit last week, that we were not clearer on that. Okay, in the very situation Europe, and especially the German government is in, I didn't expect that they were politically capable to do that in this very time. You know, the German government was so under threat domestically that before the summer break, there was the possibility that the coalition could break. We were been heading to snap elections here in Germany, so that eventually didn't happen in Germany. But nobody can predict what's going to happen here in fall. So we need stability in Europe. We need more strength and clearness on the security matter. And for that very reason, I really much hope that Germany and France, who are the most important nations within the EU, restabilize again politically, and were able to lead Europe to be a strong pillar within NATO to really encounter the threat we see from the east.
Thank you.
Liana, can I add a quick footnote?
I'm running out of time, Giselle, and I definitely give Alexei the last word to conclude that meeting. Because I have one final question to you, Alexei. One thing that we haven't raised at all is that the NATO communique very explicitly targets and underlines the role of China as a crucial enabler of Russia's war. What is your expectations towards Europeans? I mean, this is the rhetoric of the communique, but there haven't been any strong actions so far from the European side to undercut China's support for Russia. How do you look at this linkage between China and Russia, and what are your expectations there?
I think that what we have today in the world is the axis of chaos. You know, all these famous axis of evil wording. I think this time it's axis of chaos. They're just trying to put as much chaos in the world as possible. And the leader of this axis is not Russia. The leader of this axis is China. And they are standing behind all these Iran, Russia, Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, and all these Cuba, Venezuela, and so on and so on. So this is a huge threat. I think European countries just trying to ignore the threat like they did with the Russian threat. Now they're trying to ignore the Chinese threat. I think this is one of good things in this NATO summit. There's clear wording about China. So I hope that it will be not just words, but also actions from European countries too. And one word I would like to add, in any way, whatever would happen on the other side of the ocean, I mean, we all saw, if on Saturday evening Trump would be killed, we don't know what would happen in the United States of America. It was just 1 inch. What will be in the United States? I don't know. It could be a civil war. It could be, I don't know. I mean, I'm so happy that Mr. Trump is alive, because that would mean that the world is in complete chaos. And in these, this example shows that Europe cannot just rely on the United States of America in security. It should build its own security muscles. And being fat doesn't mean being strong. This is about Europe today.
Thank you, Alexei. That was a very strong plea to end our discussion. I think you're certainly right. I mean, it still seems that everyone is under shock and kind of holding their breath after Saturday's events. It's not yet clear what the consequences exactly will be for the politics here in the United States in the November elections. But certainly these are unprecedented times ahead. So I would like to thank you all very much for taking part in this very timely discussion. I think this was a wonderful group with wonderful perspectives from the United States, from Germany, and from Ukraine. So thank you very much for your time and participation. I hope we can come back again together in a different constellation at the next NATO summit. And in the meantime, all the best to you. And thank you to our viewers for joining in today and for your questions. Thanks so much and have a wonderful day.